Indonesia has been one of the world's fastest growing economies. For 3 consecutive years, the country posted growth of more than 6%. So, how did it get there? Manufacturing made up almost 1/3 of the economy a decade ago. Then, record high commodity prices and the developing world's appetite for natural resources such as palm oil, tin, coal sparked a very big commodity boom, and they benefited. Now, that is starting to fizzle out, and the GDP is expected to drop about 5% this year. Analysts are worried that the lack of industrial diversity will lead perhaps to an economic stumble. The country is trying to build up other sectors, but so far the lack of skilled workers and lack of tax incentives have left businesses waiting to set up shop in that country and instead setting up shop in other countries like its neighbors, such as Malaysia. We're going to talk much more about this. Saruhan Hatipoglu joins us, CEO of the Biz Environment Risk Intelligence Consulting firm. I just would rather call it Barry. It's good to see you again and welcome back. Indonesia is a very interesting country because there has been so much expectation in the last few years with the whole commodity boom.
Correct.
Things have now settled down, and now the weaknesses of the country have sort of come out. We've got a big election here. Explain to our viewers around the world, why is this election so important to Indonesia's economy? Why should they care?
Well, because Indonesia, like India, has a lot of potential which they have not lived up to. They are over-relying on their exports. That's one of the major problems. And what we're seeing right now, the slower economic growth, is exactly because of that, because their mining exports are doing horrendously, especially in the first quarter, right? So the next president that needs to come will need to address regulatory issues, reform issues that previous Indonesian president and governments have not touched. Indonesian people are getting frustrated and they need something to be done. But the election is too close, and whoever wins it, Phil, will have to work with a fragmented parliament, which is going to be very difficult to pass key economic measures.
People forget that, you know, it just wasn't that long ago that Suharto was in office, and Andy hinted at it, that a lot's changed. A lot of reforms have already taken place. The people in that country has a sniff of sort of economic freedom, if you will, that they can start their own business, they can do their own things. But some things haven't changed, and for a lot of foreign companies trying to get into Indonesia, they still face, unfortunately, the two dirty words, which is red tape. Can that be changed?
Unfortunately, no. Well, that should change because Indonesia is suffering from current account deficit. They need foreign investment. But any of the candidates, if you look at them, they are actually playing to the popular sentiment here. They're going to adopt populist policies, which is based on national sovereignty and protection. So we're not going to see an increase in foreign investment, unfortunately, in Indonesia, whoever wins this election.
We mentioned earlier this transition from resource-based to more manufacturing, more high-tech jobs. Look, every country wants high-tech jobs.
Sure.
There's not a single country in the world who doesn't want those jobs. But the question is, can they attract those jobs, whether it's internally or organic, or it has to come from outside? You have to import those jobs.
They have to address key fundamental issues if they want to achieve that. And what are those key issues? Well, they need to address labor market inefficiencies, right? They have to reform that. They have to get rid of this fuel subsidy, which is about 20% of the entire budget. Not immediately in one sitting, but gradually. And both actually presidential candidates are claiming that they're going to deal with that, and they have to. But they also need to move away from this resources, over-reliance of commodity exports. They need to pay more to education and think more in the long term than just getting by. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Okay, no, fair enough. When you're in an election process, you're going to tell people what they most likely probably want to hear. I know no one wants to hear that, but it's an election, and that's what happens. After all this election stuff is over and they actually have to go to work, the winner has to actually implement reforms. Is there one that you think that can do a better job of that?
Well, globally, our clients and a lot of investors are looking at one candidate, obviously, not the general, one candidate that is reform-minded, right, so Jokowi. But is that going to happen? Because if you look at their agenda, they're very similar, Phil. They're both talking about getting rid of the fuel subsidy. They're both talking about protection against foreign investment. They're both talking about labor market.
They may have the same goals, but they have different methods to do it, right?
And I'll tell you that. That's a great point. One, the reformist has the bottom-up approach. He wants to concentrate on reforming the institutions, whereas the other candidate is top-down. I want more enhanced presidential powers, and I'm going to take care of all the problems that Indonesia has. That's a big choice to make, right? They have the similar goals, but very different methods. I would, of course, vote for the more democratic approach, grassroots, bottom-up approach. That would be better for Indonesia's future.
Let's do the top-down approach. Let's look at its neighbors, the reaction from Thailand, from Malaysia, even Singapore, Vietnam,
Sure.
some of the regional neighbors who are also competitors as well in many
Sure.
respects for these same type of higher-end jobs. And they have their own reforms they're trying to put in place. Who's better for regional security?
Well, regional security is going to be a big problem because, again, both of these candidates are nationalistic too. They will not hesitate using that card when things get difficult, right? They're going to go to the populist policies. Now, when we talked about India, we also talked about nationalism, right? The president's party is nationalistic there. But he had a huge mandate, right? He has the majority, whereas in Indonesia, none of these presidential candidates will have majority. And unfortunately, in India, it's fortunate that Mr. Modi is not going to be able to cover up economic failures. There's not a large enough Indian flag to cover up those possible economic failures, but in Indonesia, there are.
There is a lot going on in that area. Unfortunately, we have to still wait at least another 2 weeks or so. Saruhan from Bari, thank you very much.
Sure.
Good to see you.